Now, Pavarotti was a good friend.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. Now, as a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions, not here to slander. Let's get started. Folks, been doing this series on the bonus evidence against Bryan Kohberger in the Moscow unalivings case. One of the pieces that I put in was the Doordash driver. And you know, for those of you that have been following me, you know that I've been ripping apart this Doordash from top to bottom, inside out, and sideways for a long time now. And although I keep getting close, I've always felt like there's just something that I've been missing. And in finishing up this series and diving into the Doordash one more time, it took me actually putting the movements of the Doordash together along with the movements of the suspect vehicle in Moscow and the movements of Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kopacka on the night of the atrocity, and putting all those movements together and then filling in the blanks with all the other information from the warrants and everything else that we know and from research that other people have done. And then it all finally came together for me. It finally came together for me. And I'm thinking about 99% of what's really happened the night of the atrocity, and it's 99.999% of what the defense is going to argue when this case goes to trial. And bear with me, because I put together some things on this that I think can open your eyes the same way it did mine. So without further ado, let's just get into this thing. Okay, folks, pay close attention. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to try to go through it a little bit, not too fast anyways, just so that you can follow me along on everything, because this is all these dots being connected. And you can see in a timeline right here on 11/13/2022. For some reason I put 24 on all of these. It's all 2022. I have to fix that. But we have the atrocity on King Road. Now, the investigation into the atrocity begins at that point. And we all know that as they ascertain certain facts from the crime scene, they start to issue search warrants for different social media accounts and things of that nature, but nothing really between the 13th and December the 6th. Actually, in the investigation, when you go through the docs, nothing produced any leads that were critical to the investigation. When you go through the PCA, the first thing they list that's critical to the investigation is the WSU officer finding Kohberger's car matching the description on November 29th. But we know that's not the case, because that was never reported to the investigating team until December 20th. So other than the DNA that they recovered from the knife sheath, they sent that to CODIS on the 20th and possibly sent something to one of the labs on the 29th. We've seen the Othram invoice. That could have been the lab, maybe not. We don't know now. But nothing else in this investigation had produced anything. And then, out of nowhere, on December 6th, the first search warrant with any type of merit is actually issued. And that is to Doordash. Now, we would have assumed that the law enforcement would have seen the Doordash order at the house and they would have investigated it. They got the forensic download from Kernodle's phone showing where she placed that Doordash order, and they would have investigated it. But they did nothing about the Doordash comes around until the warrant's filed on December 6th. And December 5th, we have to assume that something hit law enforcement's radar to make them start looking into Doordash. So we have to figure that out. But when we go back to the original PCA, you can see it says this is with the exception of Kernodle, who received a Doordash order at the residence at approximately 4 a.m. Now, law enforcement identified the Doordash delivery driver who reported this information. So, at 4 a.m., that information that the Doordash driver arrived at that time was reported by the Doordash driver. And when we look at a review of records obtained from a forensic download of Kernodle's phone, showed this could have also been Kernodle, as her cellular phone indicated she was likely awake and using the TikTok app at approximately 4:12 a.m. You see, if the Doordash driver or the Doordash order would have been ascertained from the forensic download of Kernodle's phone, they would have put that in this PCA just like they did with the TikTok app at 4:12 determining she was awake. They would have put it in the PCA determining that she placed a Doordash order. And then maybe they would have determined from the Doordasher that they arrived at 4 a.m. Maybe her forensic download might not have shown that, but the fact that she would have placed the order, it would have, and they would have put that in the PCA, but they didn't. In fact, you can see the way that I've copied and pasted this in. Look how straight this line is in the PCA where it says this is with the exception of Kernodle, who received a, and then look how the PCA lettering goes kind of, off kilter, right? It's like it's been added later, and it's done this way for a reason. So this statement right here obviously wasn't something that they put together in a hurry, because they've had to copy and paste this thing and put it together. So something should tell us that is kind of fishy just by that, but nothing says that the forensic download of Kernodle's phone shows that she placed that Doordash order. I don't think that she placed that Doordash order off of her phone. I believe somebody informed law enforcement that Doordash should be looked into for some reason. Now, the only significant event around this was the fact that TF was transferred back from Spokane, Washington's, wherever they had him held, back to Latah County around the 2nd of December. So all of a sudden on the 5th, somebody puts Doordash in law enforcement's ear. It's not too hard to figure out who that person was. Then we go to the warrants for Doordash. And the first warrant issued for Doordash was on December 6th, and it was by Lawrence Mowry. And the warrant that he issued requested information from January 1st of 2022 to the present day, which at that time would have been December 6th of 2022. And what he was requesting was date and times of sales, date and time of deliveries, purchases and transactions, identifications of the driver, the names of the driver, a full description of the vehicles used, any and all communications between the driver and the purchasers. And you can see that Megan Marshall signed that warrant on December 6th. So that's originally what he was requesting. And then you can see the history of what the events that took place in this warrant. On December 6th, he filed for the warrant. On December 6th, the warrant was served by email to Doordash. And then on December 7th, he received an email from Doordash which contained all of the information. And then he placed the email with all the information in the evidence facility, and Megan Marshall, an evidence facility, and then he signed it on December 8th that he's put the information in the evidence facility. And then on December 9th, Judge Megan Marshall, signed an order to seal the information in the warrant. Now, what she cited for the reason to seal this warrant was 32G1. And that's going to be a little different from what they're citing to seal it later. Just to show you, 32G1 is court records exempt from disclosure, except provided in paragraph H of this rule, court records specified below are exempt from disclosure. Any willful or intentional disclosure or accessing of sealed, shielded, or exempt court records not otherwise authorized under this rule may be treated as a contempt of court, but specifically G1, which means they sealed it under documents and records to which access is otherwise restricted by state or federal law. So at this point in time, they're sealing this thing just basically on the documents and records of 32G1. Not that they had any pertinent information on anything related to the case or a witness in the case. Now, when we move forward to March 7th of 2023, when Judge Megan Marshall upheld the sealing of this warrant, you can see she used a different statute. She used ICAR 32I2A. And now that's different than 32G1. So I2A is this, that the documents or materials contain highly intimate facts or statements, the publication of which would be highly objectionable to a reasonable person. So highly intimate facts or statements that would be highly objectionable to a reasonable person. So that means that they, at this time, they're sealing it because they talked to the Doordash driver, they received a statement, and it contains highly intimate facts about the case. And that's why they sealed it again on March 7th, and it remains sealed to this day. So, what could they have figured out? Well, when we look at Jack in the Box, and I'm assuming this schedule hasn't changed much because now Jack in the Box is available for deliveries from 6 a.m. to 4 a.m. In some cases it says 24 hours a day, but I'm just going to go by what it says on their site, 6 a.m. to 4 a.m. And when we look at the movements of the Doordash delivery, it is quite shocking. Because if you take 4 a.m. delivery at the King Road address and you backtrack it through the quickest route through Google on 270, it's basically 20 minutes to the Jack in the Box there in Pullman, Washington. So if you backtrack 4 a.m. to Jack in the Box at 340, then you've got a really weird situation happening. So you've got 340, or maybe even a little before 340, you've got the Doordash driver going down Stadium Way, right where they say they picked up the suspect vehicle, Elantra, going north on Nevada Street, south on Nevada Street, and then back onto Stadium Way. Now you've got this Doordash vehicle coming down supposedly south on Stadium Way, turning the same way and getting on 270, just like they say suspect vehicle did. And that would put them showing up at the King Road house at exactly 4 a.m. Now that trek right there it's very weird. It would be easy for law enforcement to say, well, yeah, this Doordash driver would probably have seen suspect vehicle 1 because they're coming on the same path, going to the same place, coming from the same place. And this is why a lot of people would say, dang, if they got Kohberger and he is the Doordash driver, because look, it's taking the same route law enforcement saying he took. But that's not the case.
We do know about an Emma Bailey there is an Emma Bailey from Moscow, Idaho, who lived right behind the road, right behind the Moscow King Road murders. She lived right behind there, an individual that's 22 years old and recently got arrested with another individual, Demetrius Robinson, for giving drugs, fatal drugs, to another individual just south of Seattle.
The employee inside here told me the DoorDash driver that picked up the food for Xana was a woman. It was a woman with black hair. And
now we go back to Kohberger's original alibi statement. This is Mr. Kohberger's defense team continues investigating and preparing his case. And this was back in July of 2023. And evidence corroborating Mr. Kohberger being at a location other than the King Road address will be disclosed pursuant to discovery and evidentiary rules as well as statutory requirements. It is, and again right here it says, being at a location other than the King Road address, meaning at the time of the unalivings, they will be disclosing it at some point, they said in the original alibi. Okay? Now, it is anticipated this evidence may be offered by way of cross-examination of witnesses produced by the state, as well as an expert witness. So their plan is taking one of the state's witnesses and corroborating Mr. Kohberger not being at the King Road address, and the expert witness corroborating everything that he can corroborate as well. So Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours. This is his last alibi, right? The one he issued on April 17, 2024. Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022. You can just eliminate the next line, as he often did to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. He's not saying he did that this night. He's saying that he often did that. So people confuse that because they don't pay attention. But he was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022. He drove throughout the area of south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, Idaho, including Wawaway Park. So the defense is clearly stating that Mr. Kohberger went south of Pullman, west of Moscow, to Wawaway Park. Now, Mr. Kohberger intends to offer testimony of Cy Ray, CSLI expert, to show that Mr. Kohberger's mobile device was south of Pullman, Washington, and west of Moscow, Idaho on November 13th. Now, the reason I believe that Cy Ray is going to be able to show some corroborating evidence on this is because even though it shows Kohberger's phone pinging at 2:48 for the last time, that doesn't mean that that is all of the cast data on his phone. His phone stopped pinging at that location, but they could still have cast data a short time period after that to show that Mr. Kohberger was heading away from Moscow, heading south of Pullman, and that would be west of Moscow towards Wawaway before it stops reporting. Then they take the historical cast data. That's why it had that statement, as he often did, to hike and look at the moon and stars. He takes the historical cast data and shows that he had made trips in the past to Wawaway Parks taking that same route. See, that's how he partially corroborates him going to Wawaway. And that's why it doesn't say corroborates, it says partially corroborates. And I'll get into it more here in a minute. But that means that's not Kohberger's car on Highway 270, passing Floyd's cannabis shop, right? So he didn't go that way. He went towards Wawaway Park. And then it says additional information as to Kohberger's whereabouts as the early morning hours progressed, including additional analysis by Mr. Ray, will be provided. Will be provided. At some point, they're going to provide it. Once the state provides discovery requested and now subject to an upcoming motion to compel. You see, the additional information to his whereabouts in the early morning hours as they progressed is that Mr. Kohberger was at the residence on Shetland Court, a block or two away from the King Road residence. And the reason it says that additional information as to Mr. Kohberger's whereabouts in the early morning hours progressed, the reason it says including additional analysis by Mr. Ray will be provided. Mr. Ray cannot provide additional analysis on where his vehicle was during the time of the atrocity because it wasn't reporting to the network. The prosecution has already said there's no data on that, so the defense has no data either. And that is correct. But the prosecution is trying to use the previous cast history of his trips to Moscow, those 12 trips, to show a history of him going into the neighborhood where the King Road house is. Cy Ray will be showing additional analysis, trying to prove through the cast data that he was in that area, but he was going to the Shetland Court address and not the King Road residence. And that's why when you see him in court asking for all of the drive test information of the actual crime scene itself and how important that is, and it's missing from the data because that is what he's using to corroborate that he wasn't at the house during the 12 previous trips. He was at a different address on Shetland Court. And even as our old guy Howard Bloom says in his book, he might have even visited Bailey from time to time at her home in Moscow, which, as it happened, was tucked into the very end of a cul-de-sac, a minute or so drive from the house, which would put it very much within the same incriminating tower radius as the scene of the crime on King Road. It was a tantalizing hypothesis, and its significance only gained power in the wake of a new motion the defense had filed. Kohberger has an alibi. His alibi will be Emma Bailey, the Doordash driver. Now, when you look at this, again, this is the Doordash driver's route on the night of the atrocity. 340 at Jack in the Box, going down Stadium Way, across 270 to the house at 4 a.m. delivering the food. According to what the defense is going to try to prove, this is what law enforcement is stating, that the perpetrator of the actual crime itself, their vehicle's movements were. At 3:26 a.m., they were caught on Indian Hills Boulevard right here. And then they continued to be caught on cameras all the way to the King Road neighborhood, making several passes around the house. So this is the prosecution's case, that this is the unaliver in suspect vehicle 1, and those were his movements. And he's caught at 3:26 a.m. on Indian Hills Boulevard. But the defense will try to prove that he did not go 270 to Moscow. Him and Kopaka leave Coffee House Apartments at approximately 2:55, and they head towards Wawawe, south of Pullman, west of Moscow. Oh, I just messed my map up. And Cy Ray, I believe, will be able to corroborate that through cast data until about right here, where they're heading south. But by doing that and going to Wawawe, that puts them at Wawawe at about 3:24 a.m. Now, you can see that's 20 minutes basically from Coffee House to Wawawe. Now, when they leave Wawawe, if you look to the map to the right at 3:24, and they take the fastest route to Shetland Court, you can see that's 40 minutes. So that puts them at Shetland Court at 4:04 a.m. Just enough time for Emma Bailey to have left the King Road residence, dropping off the Doordash that Xana didn't order, and then bringing herself over to her house at Shetland Court to meet Kohberger and Kopaka to deliver substances. That is going to be the defense's argument in this case, and I think it is a really good argument, and it's going to be a stronger argument than the prosecution's, because once this argument is made, if they're here at 4:04 a.m., it's impossible for them to have been 3:26 a.m. going up Indian Hills. That means that's a different car by different people that went into the King Road neighborhood and circled the house. And if they believe that is the perpetrator, then that can't be Bryan Kohberger as the perpetrator. And that is the facts of the Doordash. And that is what the defense's strategy is. And the prosecution is trying to use it a different way. And folks, they are going to fail. So I think the important thing for us to keep separated is the cast report, okay, and the cast data. Because the cast data and what it shows on the night of the atrocity is going to be very limited. Again, I believe it shows more of the movements of Kohberger's phone than was last reported in the PCA at 2:48 a.m. when it says it stops reporting to a network. I believe the cast data continued to report after that 2:48 a.m. time period, and it reported long enough for Ray to be able to show the movements of Kohberger's phone going away from Moscow and heading towards Huawei. I don't believe it'll show that he went all the way there, but that's when the historical data comes into play. He'll be able to show through historical data that Kohberger has traveled to Huawei several times in the past. Just like the prosecution is trying to show that his vehicle traveled to Moscow 12 times in the past to show, to show history of travel. So Ray will be able to do the same thing to try to show that he went to Huawei. But by doing that, it will be impossible for the prosecution to argue that that's Bryan Kohberger's car at 3:26 a.m. on Indian Hills Boulevard, because he can't get from Huawei to the house on Shetland Court before 4:04 a.m. And being able to show that will also refute the historical cast data that will try to show Bryan Kohberger in that neighborhood of the King Road residence 12 prior occasions. Now, that is why Ray needs the drive detail report, the drive test report from the actual King Road residence itself, because he's not trying to prove that he wasn't there on the night of the atrocity. That is for him to prove that he was not at the King Road residence on those 12 prior trips. He's trying to prove through that he was actually at the Shetland Court residence instead of the King Road residence. So, and that's what it's all going to come down to. But that is what happened with the Doordash driver. Emma Bailey delivered the Doordash at 4 a.m., then went to her house on Shetland Court to meet Kohberger and Kopacka to deliver substances. So, with that being the case, it can't be Kohberger and Kopacka in the King Road residence at 4:07 committing the atrocities. And that's why it says in the original alibi that they're going to use the state witness to prove Kohberger's alibi. State witness is Emma Bailey, the Doordash driver, in my humble opinion, once again. But I hope you enjoyed this video, because it was eye-opening for me. I hope it was eye-opening for you as well. And what I'm going to do, as I've already mentioned this, is there's a couple of videos that I'm finishing before the hearing on these bonus evidences against Bryan Kohberger. You've already seen, I hope you've already seen the one on the informant. Here's the Doordash. The other one that I have coming out is just a short video on the IGG. But then I hope to complete my final video before the hearing starts, and that one I'm directing directly to Ann Taylor, because she has a big opportunity in this hearing, and I'm not going to spill the beans on what I'm going to say right now, but in that last video right before the hearing, I sure hope she sees it, because I'm going to give her the argument that she can use to get the venue changed and get out in the open all of the things that we want to hear out in the open, and easily bypass the non-dissemination order doing it due to the circumstances in the change of venue hearing. But please like and subscribe to the channel. And for those of you out there, I appreciate it when you post your comments, you post your thoughts, even your criticisms. And until next time, Pavarotti is out.